Thank you so much, Fran. Can all of you hear me now and see me? It is so good to be here and to see some of you that I haven't seen for a long time, some that have come from across town and some even from other towns, so it's a delight to see you. Suppose that you had the most beautiful, the most expensive, the most treasured of anything in all of the world. It was your possession. You owned it. And then suppose that someone came up to you and said, I would like to trade you some ashes for your beautiful gift, for your treasure. What would you think? What would you say? You would think, well, that's how ridiculous, how incredible that you would offer me ashes for my beautiful gift, my beautiful treasure. And yet, do you know that is exactly what is happening today to every Christian in our nation? You say, how is that? How could it be? That brings up then our first scripture. And one of the prophecies in Isaiah that's so seldom read, I think, but yet a very hopeful and encouraging prophecy. Maybe you don't remember, because I hadn't until one day I was studying and came across this, that in Isaiah the 61st chapter, when God promised through Isaiah that he was going to send to the world a messenger, and I'm abbreviating these things for sake of time, a messenger who would preach good tidings, who would bind up the brokenhearted, who would free those that are in spiritual prisons, that would comfort all that mourn, and that would bring beauty for ashes. Now, when was that fulfilled, and by whom? We're not left to guess or speculate, because we're told. We can turn right over here and to Luke, the fourth chapter in verse 16, and it tells about Christ as he went into Nazareth where he had grown up. And he entered into the synagogue, which was his what he did on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And there was delivered unto him the book, it says. And he turned to the prophet Isaiah. And he read this very passage from Isaiah 61. And he said, this day has this been fulfilled in your ears. And he closed the book and gave it back, it says, to the messenger or to the minister, and sat down. And all the eyes of the people in the synagogue were on him. But he testifies once and for all that this prophecy in Isaiah was fulfilled in him. Therefore today, Christians, all of us who have the privilege of being Christians, we are beneficiaries of this beauty that Christ brought to the world. Now, there are voices today, loud and in big places, strong places, influential places, that are coming to us and saying, I would like to trade ashes for your beautiful gift. You say, how in the world could that be? Okay, stay with me. Back at the time when Isaiah's prophecy was made, the world had the ashes of pagan religions, of human philosophies, of unbelief, of spiritual rebellion, even of witchcraft and of fortune telling. The world had those ashes. And Christ came to give us the beauty instead of the ashes. Now there are people all over our nation, and they are in places of influence, who are saying to us, no, the ashes that I have just mentioned of the pre-Christian teachings, they are superior, they are better. And they are doing everything they can to put down Christianity and replace Christianity with these ashes. Now, this is our premise this morning, to be documented. And our time is so limited that I will simply have to hit some of the high points. Who are the people? Well, first, let's consider one more scripture. You remember that when Christ was sentenced to die by Pilate, and as he started toward Golgotha, it says that a large number of people followed him, including the women, and they were wailing and lamenting it says, the scripture says. And Christ turned, looked at them, and said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. That is just as applicable today as it was back then. Why should we weep for the children? Because they are Satan's prime targets. Their tender, inquisitive minds can be so easily influenced by Satan. Why weep for ourselves? Because we are also targets of Satan. But the second reason is the children are our responsibility. And so the things that are happening today to destroy the faith, not only of us, but primarily the faith of the children, is so heartbreaking. And this morning I will have time just to mention just a few of the things that I had planned to mention many more, but our time is very limited. So I will just go through some of the high points. At the end of the lesson, you will be given a handout, 4 sheets that we have brought for you to take home so that you can explore this subject more fully. Of course, those of you that buy the book, you will have the lesson that I presented in the book. But now let's go back for just a minute and let me just hit some of the high points on this issue of the ashes that are being proposed now to take the place of the beauty of Christianity. Let's look backward for just a moment. You know that our nation was founded on biblical principles. Not that all the founding fathers were Christians, they weren't. But our laws were founded on biblical principles. You know that our Declaration of Independence declares that all men are created equal. You can't have a created without a creator. So the very Declaration of Independence recognized the creator, not just a God, but the creator God. And those of you, all of you, every coin that you have in your purse, every bill that you have in your purse has an inscription on it. What does it say? Absolutely, and it's still there. If you travel as I did and you go into the capitals of the cities and the capitals of our nation, and around the rotunda there is chiseled scriptures from the Word of God. Now, what has happened? We wake up every morning, we see our newspaper, we turn on our TV, and we see that right outside our house there is a moral jungle that we send the children out into, that we go out into, that your husband goes out into, but we don't even have to go out into it because it's brought into our home, isn't it? Weep for the children. Now, who is responsible? John Steinbacher, many years ago, was a journalist for a California newspaper. He went out to investigate what in the world has happened to our nation. He wrote a book, and this is his conclusion, and I concur with him. He says to change a nation, change the religion. And he says, and that is what has happened in our nation. Our religion has been changed from belief in God to the religion of humanism. And he is absolutely right. If we study about what is happening in the nation today, you understand that humanism has actually become our national religion. Now, I have brought for you a copy of a brief comparison of 3 world views. What is your worldview? If someone were to come and ask, what is your worldview? What would you say? You might say, I didn't know I had one. But you do, every person does, though we may not verbalize it. What is a person's worldview? That is simply what each person believes, what you and I believe, about the nature of God and man. It could be summed up in these questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is truth? Who has the authority to guide me while I am here? And where am I going? And the Christian worldview, which is listed on the left-hand side of the little printout that you will be given, lists the main things of our Christian worldview. And then it also shows how that the humanist or naturalist worldview, which came into our nation beginning in the early, even around the 1900s. Professor John Dewey, in my judgment, has done more to destroy the faith of our nation than any other one person that you can name. He lived 93 years, and for more than 50 of those years, he had abandoned his Christian heritage, and he was working toward teaching atheism and socialism. He was the author of Humanist Manifesto #1. This will also be in what you will be given. This is a reprint from the New York Times in August 1973. It tells about the publication of Humanist Manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto #2. Here is the publication, number 1 and number 2. And this is the New York Times article when the number 2 was published in 1973. It gives John Dewey's picture and says that he was the author of the one that was published in 1933. And it gives also some of the things that the humanists stand for. But it also mentions something very interesting here. It says the impact of Humanist Manifesto #1 was principally within religion, primarily among liberal Protestant denominations. It was gradually accepted in various circles, and once the daring views of the humanists have become fairly commonplace liberal assumptions. For it mentions, adding that the humanists were among the first to espouse the cause of abortion. They boast of that. Yes, it came directly from the teachings of the humanists, and now you know where it has gone. And so what do the humanists teach? Well, summarized in Humanist Manifesto #1 and #2, they deny God, a creator God. They deny, of course, creation. They deny the Bible. They deny the existence of the soul. They deny immortality. They deny the reality of heaven and hell. What do they endorse? They endorse evolution, abortion, euthanasia, the sexual revolution, homosexuality, the right to suicide, situation ethics, relativism, socialism, and world government. And these teachings have invaded and pervaded every segment of our society today. And yet most of us do not recognize them. Why? Because 99% of the time they parade under the name of something other than humanism. The only time you will hear the word humanism is maybe if you go to a university philosophy class. Everything is being promoted with the idea of something that is much more palatable. I think because of my limitation of time that I will skip on over to the ways that they do, the techniques that they do use in order to deceive so many of us. What are the propaganda techniques used by the humanists? Let's consider something about the humanists. You will notice that there is a third column on the printout that deals with the New Age movement. The human potential movement, as it has been called. What is the human potential movement? Doesn't God endorse human potential? Of course, the greatest human potential in the world is possible through God and only through God. Then what is the human potential movement, and why is it wrong? The human potential movement is this. They deny God, both the New Age people and the humanists, as we have just mentioned. But they talk about what humans can do, what we humans can do. In other words, they cut themselves off from the God of heaven, from the Creator God, and from His Word. And they say, I have within myself the power to do all things. It is the religion of the God within. And John Dewey was one of the primary philosophers that started that and spread it all over the United States. A very charismatic man. taught in the departments of philosophy in our greatest universities, lived 93 years and had such great influence, and Deweyism lives until today. In our public schools, not only our schools, but in our churches, in the religion. Okay, they say the power is within us. You don't have to have, we don't believe in the God of heaven. They make fun of the Bible. But they say within yourself, inside yourself, you have the power to do all things. And I wish we had time that we could go more fully into that. You know that there are thousands, millions of people, as they say, going to seminars every day to try to find out how to reach in and get the power outside of me. Christians do not have to do that. Why? Because we are connected to the omnipotent power of the universe. And the people that are denying that are just like somebody would try to have a light in here without plugging in the plug. You see, they're trying to have all the power when they've unplugged themselves from the greatest power that there is. And now they're saying, I have within me because God dwells within me. God is inside of me. And so it is the religion of the God within. And I want to tell you in a minute more fully how that our children are being subjected to that, and help us all to understand why that we're losing most of our children, and that by the time our children get to the 7th grade, we've lost, the records show, at least half of all of the children in the church. It's fearful, it's frightful, it's sad. What is causing us to lose them? Even the children that are attending church every time the doors are open, they are getting the ashes of the human potential movement fed to them on every hand. Somebody might say, why are we discussing these things in a Bible class? We are discussing Bible because God tells us, we're told in the Bible, that we must be able to understand the techniques that Satan uses. We must be able to understand, to recognize what he is doing to us and to the children. In order to do that, our basis, our faith, our authority, everything we have begins here. I have no authority whatsoever. The authority is here. But in order to find out how Satan is destroying us, we have to get out of these 4 walls. We have to get out of this book. We have to get into books like this and find out what's happening to our children. We have to get into books like this, which I'm going to tell you in just a moment about. We have to get into some of these other books, or we don't know what's happening to the minds of our children. We are neglecting investigating how Satan is destroying the minds of our children. So I am in the Bible. This is a Bible subject. But let me show you some of the techniques that are used, why they have been able to accomplish what they have been able to accomplish. I've already mentioned one of them. Most of the time, and especially never to children, is humanism or New Ageism, either one, taught in its real name. They know that it's going to have to be done as wolves in sheep's clothing. They do it, and that's their plan. And they boast of their conquest. They boast of how successful that they have been. And before I read the techniques that they use, I want to read this, which is in the Humanist magazine, written by one of their writers, called The Religion for a New Age. And if you think that they are content to believe how they believe and leave our children and us alone, think again. They are not. They're not content for us just to leave them alone. Now listen to this, because I think it would be worthwhile for our time. I am convinced, writes this humanist, that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity that recognizes and respects the spark of what theologians call the divinity in every human being. These teachers must embody the same selfless dedication as the most rabid fundamentalist preachers, for they will be ministers of another sort, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to convey humanist values in whatever subject they teach, regardless of the educational level, preschool daycare, or large state university. The classroom must and will become the arena of conflict between the old and the new, the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the battle between the new faith of humanism, resplendent in its promise of a world in which the never realized ideal of love thy neighbor has ever been fully achieved. But humanism will emerge triumphant. It must, if humanity is to survive. So don't think for a moment that they are not teaching us and the children all of the things that they want taught. They think they are doing the children a favor. Suppose that someone should come into your home and say, I tell you what I want to do. I really love children, and I want to take your children and I want to help to dispel the idea of a creator God, dispel the myths that are in this that you call the Word of God. I want to teach them how that they can realize their full potential apart from these superstitions. What would you say? The chances are you would order them out of your house and you say, you will not do that. If I have to spend every waking moment, you will not do that to our children. And yet, behind closed doors, that is exactly what they say. I could quote to you a Harvard professor, Dr. Pierce, who said many years ago, yes, that's what we intend to do because children today come to school mentally ill, having been taught, and he lists all of those things, patriotism and so on and so forth, and ideas of God, and he says, but think of it. What can they do in a 45-minute Sunday school class when we have them all day, every day? Now, how do they do that? Listen to some of the techniques. I want to read to you Edward Hunter, back many years ago, was the first person, to my knowledge, that researched the matter of brainwashing and on American people. He did that after the Korean War because for the first time in our history, our soldiers were brainwashed into defecting to the enemy. You remember that. So he studied the procedure of brainwashing and how propaganda is used. Now, this is his conclusion. He says, this is the essence of psychological warfare. Confuse the meanings of words. Infiltrate varied and conflicting concepts into their usage, and you are able to immobilize a foe by booby-trapping his thought processes. So he says, just change the meaning of words. Retain the content and change the label. Now, suppose somebody should come into your home and take a bottle of poison, whatever, insecticide or anything else. Take the label off and label it vanilla and put it back in its place. Now, when you use that, would you get what? The benefit of vanilla or the poison of the insecticide? Obviously. And they know that principle. So to change the label, retain the content, or vice versa, is one of their techniques that they use constantly. Well, how is that being done? Let's just mention just two or three of the things. They redefine the words. Like, for instance, what? Alternate lifestyle, in their definition, means what? Yes, homosexuality. A meaningful relationship. What does that mean? That sounds so much softer than saying adultery or fornication. Just call it a meaningful relationship. Right to die is designed to gain support for euthanasia and suicide. A woman's right to her own body, a woman's right to choose, sounds so much more palatable than abortion, doesn't it? So changing the name and or keeping the label in whichever, you can do it either way, is one of their tactics. Let me tell you another basic principle, and this is so important, that the experts of propaganda say that the most effective propaganda there is that which you inject only 2% of the ideas you're trying to convey to another person. Retain 98% of what that person can agree with. And so you get the person to go and ride along with, yeah, that's pretty good. I can buy that. That's not very bad. And then he injects very subtly that 2% that he wants to use to change your thinking. And if he can get that over, he has been victorious. They don't come to you like Madalyn Murray O'Hair. I have more respect for her than I do for a John Dewey or a Paul Kurtz or some of the others that I intended to mention this morning. Because they come to us in deceit. They do not fly under their own colors, and yet they believe exactly the same thing Madalyn Murray O'Hair believes. They reject God. They reject the Bible. They reject immortality of the soul. They reject heaven and hell. It's this life only. So how can you make the most of it? They're not trying to get people to live in the gutter. They honestly believe that to rid ourselves of all of these religious superstitions is a benefit for us, that they're doing us a favor to get us to see that this should be done. And so this 2% idea is very, very important. Now let me mention another propaganda tool. They have certain buzzwords that are hooks that they get into our minds with. Now, what are those buzzwords? They are rights. You can use the word rights and you can peddle and sell almost anything to American people. You just package it as a right. They use the word choice. They use the word progress. And they use the word change. Now, all of these words are good and they have their place, but they are being used as the hooks to get into the minds of people that they want to change. Now, I must rush on. I do want to get to some of these other things. How then are some of these things being just down to earth? How are some of these things being injected into the minds of our children? Now, let me say once and for all, I agree with Dr. William Colson, and I want to mention him again in a minute, and I wish I had time to tell a lot about him. I wish I had a time to tell you for an hour about John Dewey. I never knew about him. I went 4 years to a Christian school, and I didn't know what John Dewey was doing. And it's a revelation. But I want to tell you, about Dr. Colson and what he said. He said, we have grave problems in our schools today, and everybody understands that. But what is the cause of the problem? I don't want to go into all of the aspects of it, but Dr. Colson says, rest assured, it is not the fault of the students. It is not the fault of the teachers. It is not the fault of the administrators. It is not the fault of the parents. All of us have children we love dearly that are out in the schools. All of us have family members that we love dearly, that are teachers, administrators, that would not for a minute teach anything knowingly that was not biblical. But he says the fault today lies in the education theorists. Now, that's a big word. Who are the education theorists? And who was Dr. Colson to make such a brash statement? He was one of them. He was one of the ones that helped to develop what is an educational theorist. They are those men and women who, at the top of the educational system and the writers of the books, the curriculum, the writers of the textbooks, and all of those things that are used in our schools, that do that according to their world view. They do it according to what they believe. And therefore, every administrator, every teacher that uses those books has no choice. And so the students have no choice. But it's the value system that is held by the education theories that's injected very subtly into the textbooks and into all of the programs that has helped to change our nation from a Christian nation to a humanist nation. And so I want to mention just two or three of those things to show how subtly they're done and to show how that 2% is used so effectively. Here is a book called Values Clarification. There was a time when every person who went to the national NEA meeting was required to have this. I don't know whether that's true or not. I don't think so, but at a time there was. This was written by Simon, Howe, and Kirchenbaum, every one of them humanists. And on page 16 here, they tell what their purpose is. They say young people brought up by moralizing adults are not prepared to make their own responsible choices. So he is going to tell them he doesn't want you moralizing to your children, so he is going to help to build their morals. And so, to show you how subtly it is done, this is composed of 79 strategies. What is a strategy? Only 3 minutes? Well, I don't know. What can I say in 3 minutes? A strategy is something that you use in war, that you change from one thing to the other. And so they use these so subtly. Let me give you just one example in one of the textbooks. They ask the children this: how do you feel about homemade birthday presents? Do you like wall-to-wall carpeting? What is your favorite color? What flavor of ice cream do you prefer? How do you feel about hit and run drivers? How do you feel about hit and run drivers? What are your feelings about the abortion question? Now you see, they're talking about preferences, nothing but preferences. And then they come up and throw in about hit and run drivers and abortion, which leaves in the child's mind, well, that's just a matter of preference, like flavors of ice cream. And so, but I wanted to have time to tell you how that this is being used in the public schools, and how that all of it is done in the name of values clarification, problem solving. It can be called decision making. It can be called, it's called philosophy for children. It's called discovery learning. And these techniques have spilled over into the churches. The idea of discovery learning. There are honest, sincere Christian Bible teachers that think discovery learning means that the students just go to the Bible and discover the truth. Not true. If you read what they intend, they get the children sitting around, and it's for the child to discover the answers from within himself. Now, that is the basis of all values clarification programs and discovery learning. And problem solving, all of those that are in all of our schools. You get the child to solving problems that have nothing to do with values, and then you throw in a problem where the child is supposed to decide from within himself what the answer is to be. Now that is actually child abuse. Dr. Colson says, another thing I have to mention to you, since I won't get to mention half of what I had intended to say, that if you want to get this book, in room 113, there is a display of some of this literature that I have brought, not only of some of my books, which some had asked to have here, but here is a book called Hidden Danger in the Classroom. It is compiled by Pearl Evans, but it is actually quotes from Dr. Colson, who was one of the education theorists that worked with Abraham Maslow and worked with Carl Rogers, two of the most influential humanist psychologists that our nation has ever known. And so he was one of their workers until he decided of the damage that it was doing to the children. And he made an about face. And since 1977, he has been going far and wide, speaking to people and telling them what the values clarification, the values education is doing to your children. And he is spending his life doing that. He's saying, I was a part of it. I have repented of that. He was never a humanist. He was aiding Maslow and Carl Rogers, who are among the most prominent of the humanists. And our university and college students, both of them are dead now, but when they were living, the college students and university students looked to Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow almost as if they were infallible gods. It's sad, but that was true. They influenced several generations of our brightest and smartest young people. So if you want to get Dr. Colson's quotes, this can be in the. Another thing that I would suggest, that since evolution is the basis of these worldviews, the humanist worldview and the other worldview, that I would recommend that you get this Christian Evidences by Wayne Jackson and Bert Thompson, which is a study book to study not only in your Bible classes, but in your home studies about Christian evidences, why the evolution is not true, and on and on. Excellent. This one is also a good one, The Scientific Case for Creation. But also, I wish that you would get two books that I have here that are both, they're such valuable books. These are written now by psychologists. These are written by men who are still psychologists, who are telling what psychology has done and is doing to the Christian faith. And it is everywhere, even in the Lord's church. And this book particularly is absolutely priceless. It is written by Dr. William Kirk Kilpatrick, who is still a professor of psychology. But his book is Psychological Seduction, the Failure of Modern Psychology. If nothing else, the chapter that he has in here on self-esteem, which is the motto of the God within theology. Well, doesn't God want us to feel good about ourselves? If it is in the proper way. But they teach, feel good about yourself no matter what you do. You're okay no matter what you do. That is their teaching. And so the teaching on self-esteem is worth the price of the book. Here is another psychologist, Dr. Paul Vitz, that has written this very valuable book, Religion, Psychology as Religion, in which he quotes from the prominent psychologists of the past, The Cult of Self-Worship. Very valuable books. And so I hope that you can get those if you possibly can. I wish we had time to go into some of the other things, but one of the things that I want you to understand fully is that the children that are being influenced by this in our public schools, it is real, it is not imaginary. But it is not the fault of the teachers. I don't bash the teachers. It is not the fault of the administrators. It's not the fault of the students. If anybody, though, is ever going to help turn it around, who is it going to have to be? Christian parents. Christian parents. How can we do it? Well, first we're going to have to understand the problem. And then we're going to have to understand that it's our problem. I'm reminded of the man that was sitting on the sinking ship, sitting out on the deck, reading his newspaper, just oblivious to everything that was going on. And somebody rushed by and said, "Man, what are you doing sitting there reading that paper? Don't you know this ship is sinking?" He didn't even look up. He says, "I don't care, it's not my ship." Ladies, it's our ship. I don't have children. Why have I spent the last 17 years of my life, in addition to my writing, knocking myself out to bring messages like this to Christian parents? Not in addition to being a Christian. It's because I am a Christian. And all of you, all of us, we're going to have to wake up. We're going to have to recognize the enemy. We're going to have to know where, inform ourselves and know what to do. This reminds me of another little story, and I'm going to tell it. I may run over a minute, but about the little boys at school. One day the teacher looked out the window at recess and saw two little boys just fighting to the end, just fighting to the death, just fighting with all their might and all of their strength. And she went out hurriedly out on the playground and separated them and said, "What in the world is going on here?" And one of the little boys said, "Well, he called me a hippopotamus last week." And the teacher said, "Last week? I don't understand. Why are you just now getting so mad?" He said, "'Cause I never had seen a hippopotamus until yesterday." Ladies, I hope you will take some of the information. This that I'm going to give you is called Who Would Build on a Crumbled Foundation. It is an interview with Dr. Colson. There are 4 of the handouts that we have brought for you. And so may God bless all of us. My time is up, and thank you for your attention. So good to see all of you.
Thank you so much, Lottie Beth. You see what I mean? She is so filled with the information that we need. Thank you so much.